His specialty is fruit crops in Mississippi. All right, Dr. Stafne.
All right, thank you, Tony. I appreciate that introduction. And today we're going to be talking about blueberries in Mississippi, some of the challenges and prospects for the state. I kind of framed this presentation as maybe folks out there not knowing a lot about what occurs in Mississippi with blueberries, and so give you a little bit of background as well as to how we got started. So in the history of blueberries, we didn't have very many blueberries up until about the 1970s. At that time, Hurricane Camille destroyed the tongue industry, which is, a tongue is a tree which it produces a fruit that's, you can make oil from it, and used a lot in a furniture industry and things like that. But that industry was destroyed, and so the USDA ARS was searching for a new crop. And with we do have a lot of wild blueberries, so research by Dr. Spears and others led to a nascent or upcoming blueberry industry by the early 1980s. So it started out as small, of course, and then it kind of grew from there. Since the 70s, the USDA ARS has served the research function. So a lot of breeding has been their main focus, but also cultural management studies and other things, pest management. They've released several cultivars, both rabbit eye and southern high bush, and some of those you may know, Biloxi being one of them. As far as Mississippi State University goes, we've been more involved since the 1980s once the industry got established. First, Dr. John Braswell was there, and now I'm there. And mainly we perform an extension function for that industry. We have an annual workshop, a field day, and a newsletter that I publish. So those are all things that we do as far as Mississippi State University do, and we have collaboration with the USDA ARS as well. So early in the history of the Mississippi blueberries, they were pretty easy to grow and very profitable. And so a lot of the fruit went to the frozen market, though, because the berries, we had a lot of small growers, and they were kind of parts of co-ops. So a lot of berries were accumulated together and then sold. And so most of that fruit initially went to the frozen market just because that's so much easier to deal with. But we don't have a lot of processing or packaging infrastructure within Mississippi, not then and not now. And so while it was very easy, it wasn't quite as profitable as the fresh market, which has kind of been the focus lately. Now looking a little bit forward, in 2012, which is in the first harvest year that I was in Mississippi, there are roughly 2,500 acres of commercial production and about 170 growers at that time. Most of the area of production of blueberries in Mississippi is south of I-20 and mostly in the southeastern part of the state. And then this next slide is a map. If you're not familiar with what Mississippi looks like, there's the state of Mississippi. This area in the box is south of I-20. So you're looking at Jackson, Vicksburg, Jackson Meridian as your I-20 line, and then everything is pretty much south of that. And a good bit of it is Hattiesburg and south. But this red arrow is pointing to Wayne County, which is now the largest county production of blueberries in Mississippi. So the estimated harvest in 2012 was about 7.3 million pounds. Fresh was about 2.3 million, frozen is 5. So look at twice as much frozen at that time. But as we fast forward, we're going to look and see that things have changed. Today, we're looking at 1,600 acres, roughly, of commercial blueberry production. What we're finding is a lot of the growers who got in early are aging out. They're just getting past the point of being able to deal with farming. And so the transition of that becomes tenuous in a lot of cases. We're also dealing with significant climate factors, and those being frosts, untimely rains, tropical weather, hurricanes, those sort of things have been very devastating for us the last few years. And then the pests are becoming more problematic, and especially spotted wing Drosophila has kind of thrown a monkey wrench into how we grow blueberries here. But in the last few years, the climate has really been a driving factor in why we haven't been able to harvest as many berries as we'd like to. So we fast forward to 2020, and I know that 2020 has been a significantly strange year, but our total harvest was about 2.5 million pounds. So the amount of fresh fruit that we produce is not that much different than it was 8 years ago, but the frozen is nil. It's almost nothing now. And a lot of that is because of the price that's being able to be obtained for that fruit. So we're looking at more of a transition towards a fresh market, and it's gone from 75% frozen to almost 100% fresh now in 2020. So I mentioned some of these challenges that we're dealing with, and changing climate is one, and it's a very significant one, but also market access, pests, labor, grower age, and federal regulation. So I'll talk a little bit more about each of these and why they're challenges and some of the things that go into them. So changing climate, and we know this is changing, and what we're seeing is that there are several factors that are impacting the blueberry industry. One of them is chill accumulation, and we have had years where our chilling has been short or pretty close to being short, and that has affected, if not all varieties, some varieties, and that can be a very significant factor. We had a year where our chilling was short, which delayed harvest significantly, and it moved us right out of our best market window. So that is a problem. We don't see it every year, but it is a concern. So spring frosts are also something we worry about, has been a worry throughout the whole entire history of the industry, but it's something to be concerned about, especially as if growers are transitioning more towards southern highbush varieties. One of the things that I'm a little concerned about is some of these fall freezes that we're getting, because last year we had a fairly significant freeze event before we even had a frost. So our first time below 32 degrees was about 24 degrees. And so that caused some, we don't know the extent of the damage, but I think that we did see some loss of yields related to that. And this year was not as bad, but it did get down to 28 degrees here before we saw frost. So that was another concern. I don't expect any major impacts from that, but as going forward, it could be. I would say probably the main problem that we're really having the last few years, especially, is with the tropical weather, and it's becoming earlier and more frequent, and especially during our harvest. And we are seeing this the last few years where we're getting extreme rains in May and June, 5+ inches of rain, whether they're called a tropical storm or a tropical depression or an unnamed event, they cause the same amount of impact. And we've had just terrible luck the past probably 3 years with this, and it's very concerning going forward. Like I mentioned, our harvest season is late April for southern highbush, and then we go into mid-May to early July for rabbit eye. So that's our real market, and that's what we're looking at. But these climate effects are causing problems. So our market is, we grow about 95% rabbit eye, and that seems to be less desirable in the marketplace a lot of times. So that limits where we can sell it and how much we can sell it. We don't have any IQF facilities that we are processing blueberries. So that's also limits our ability on the frozen market. And again, we have that small window of opportunity to make money. And if we miss that, it could be very significant for our growers going forward. The pest issues are kind of similar across the southeastern U.S. Exobasidium leaf and fruit spot. We have seen this grow within Mississippi in the last 8 years or so. One of the big problems is we didn't have an effective way to control it. Lime sulfur was difficult to get, and it's a very nasty chemical to work with. Sulfurix was not labeled in Mississippi until this year, so hopefully going forward we'll have some opportunity to control it better than we have. And it's kind of spotty in areas, but it can be devastating. We also see things, and kind of wonder about them. Are we seeing more Botrysphaeria, cane dieback? What about Xylella and the impacts of that and other viruses? So we don't have a good handle on what's going on with those issues either, but we have concerns. Spotted wing Drosophila is probably the major insect pest that we've dealt with, and that's changed dramatically how blueberries are grown in Mississippi. For the most part, before that pest, we didn't spray for insects during harvest or any time after the fruit was set, essentially. So now with that, there's consistent and frequent spraying, which our growers don't like to do, and some of them just refuse to do. So that has caused a downtick in quality, and some growers just not doing it anymore and getting out of the business. We've had a problem with cherry fruit worm recently. Hopefully that's just isolated case, but it really impacted 1 year's harvest for us. So we're always waiting on the next one to see what's going to happen. As far as mechanization and access to labor, we all know that these harvesters are expensive, and but we're seeing more and more transition to them in Mississippi just because of the problem with getting labor. And even though we're transitioning here, we're kind of still wondering, is the quality good enough for the fresh market? And I think that we'll eventually get there. I know there's a lot of research being done in that area, and I think we'll be there with the right varieties and the right equipment before long. But the labor is a problem. It's not so much a problem for established, larger, well-run operations, but the kind of smaller and fly-by-night type operations who use labor in the past can't get them anymore. So I mentioned grower age, and our average age is over 60 years old, and there are very few younger growers in the game right now in Mississippi. So we also find that these older growers are less adaptive, so they're not inclined to change cultivars, not inclined to invest so much into the technology to keep up with the demands of the industry. So if you're growing rabbit eyes, you can have bushes that are 30 or 40 years old, and you think, well, they're still producing. Why should I tear them out and put in something new? And it's hard to combat that type of thinking, that you might be improving your operation by doing that. But we also see a lack of transition within the family, and sometimes the older grower just passes away, and nobody in that family wants to take over the business, and either it fizzles out, or there's maybe someone else within the community trying to take it over, and that's not always successful. So that's a significant problem for us as well. Of course, federal regulation, FSMA, Food Safety Modernization Act. We have been doing a lot of training with this. Dr. Juan Silva has been on top of this, and I've done lots of trainings as well, and I think we've done a good job. Our growers have recognized the need to do this training. So, but there's costs involved with that, and it can be confusing. So there's some of that. But the Department of Labor, especially if you're using labor, immigrant status, and there's kind of fear of inspections going on. I'm not sure that it's quite what it is now, what it was when things were really heated up there, but it's still concerning in these two areas for our growers, and not only to comply, which is what they want to do, but getting fines and not being able to pay. That they are concerned about that. So I asked 3 growers of what they thought in terms of the challenges and prospects were, and I just give these a real quick read here. This is a grower near Jackson, Mississippi, so he's kind of on the northern area of where most of the blueberries are being grown. And he says pest problems continue, but they can be controlled. Research is imperative. He has invested in machine harvesting, and but he's interested in more research in this area to improve the machine harvesters. Packing temperature, bring berries down, what is ideal for marketable for fresh berries, and I think he's talking in relation to machine harvesting here. And then you'll see a kind of common thing here in terms of all these growers and about developing markets. A grower east of Hattiesburg, which is kind of in the heart of the blueberry area, says their struggles are similar to other places: labor, pest management, FSMA. He says that Mississippi has a lack of marketing options just due to the small amount of fruit that we actually produce. And the rabbit eye and the frozen market is an issue. But he sees that perhaps moving our fruit west would save some cost and have that benefit for us versus, say, Georgia. A grower east on the eastern border of the state near Alabama says, in our case, we have good outside of Mississippi sales. So they sell to Texas and have done a good job with that. But they don't have any luck with the weather. And this is what the climate issues I'm talking about with the rain especially is what they've been seeing as a problem. And again, better marketing and awareness in that state, and they back research and development too. So I think we see a lot of common threads here from a lot of these growers, even though they're from different parts of the state and they're different size operations. We see a lot of these commonalities. So what are our prospects? And some of these have been alluded to previously. We see local, regional, international markets potentially, value-added products, and then I'll throw in here an idea about rabbit eyes. So I think we need to target fresh markets. Of course, we're looking there this year. Almost all our fruit went that way. We have to identify areas that are not being served by others. And that may just be locally. And I think there's an inward looking to the state, figure out where to put our fruit. So, but some areas to the west might be best. As I mentioned, Wayne County Co-op, they send things to Texas. The Miss Lou Co-op has gone overseas. Not so much this year, but in past years, they sent to India and United Arab Emirates and other places like that, and have found some success doing it that way. Value-added products is another area. Of course, wine has been around for a long time, even though it's not something that we've had a lot of in Mississippi. But distilled spirits is a real growth area, and there may be some potential for that. We do have a grower who's making wine and some distilled spirits. Blueberry vodka, I think, is what he's using. So that's something really new in Mississippi. Some other states are far beyond where we are, but this is new for us. So I think there's potential there. Dried fruit, it's not a new concept, but I think there's growth there. There's a lot of interest in nutraceutical, pharmaceutical products from blueberries. I think it's just hitting on the right one. Whether we produce enough blueberries to make that worthwhile is another thing. So synergism with other products and industries. The tourism industry in Mississippi is fairly strong down in the South Gulf Coast area, so I think they've been doing a good job with that in terms of tying in blueberries with tourism. We have a blueberry jubilee, and then there's another blueberry festival down on the coast. And so those things kind of showcase Mississippi blueberries. And then there's that whole idea about rabbit-eye versus southern high-bush. Of course, we know that rabbit-eye or southern high-bush ripens earlier. You get the better price for that, and it's it's more attractive that way. But rabbit-eye kind of fits better into our market window and kind of what we're doing. Of course, there's upsides and downsides to both of these things. Now, Georgia's transitioned a lot towards southern high-bush, and that leaves that rabbit-eye market available for us if we can take advantage of it. But some of the other research is looking at very late ripening cultivars. Can we find something that maybe we can ripen in September or October? Maybe using high tunnels. If you look at that picture on the left, that's my high tunnel, or it was. I have not had much luck with high tunnels in my research, but it's an area it has potential. So we're looking at some different varieties under high tunnels and see what that happens, and also growing them in pots too. So I don't want to throw out rabbit eyes completely. I think there's a place for them, and in Mississippi, it grows a lot of these rabbit eyes, and we have the opportunity to take advantage of that market, and we shouldn't just stop growing rabbit eyes. So some of my final thoughts here: the Mississippi industry, it's really in a state of transition right now. We don't know which way it's going to go, but I do think that perhaps at 2,500 acres, we were a little bit overextended with 170 growers. We didn't have enough serious growers at that number. So we've shedded some of those growers who weren't serious about the industry, and now we're kind of getting closer to a core industry where it's more sustainable, I think. I think we're going to see a lot more of kind of the local marketing of our fruit, and then some of this value added type of stuff, especially with the burgeoning kind of fruit and wine industry, with the liquor industry, these things kind of starting to gain some momentum within Mississippi and some of the surrounding states. I think we're going to see some of our fruit go there as well. But again, we're going to try and see that, try and get some of that best fresh market price still. I think that's going to be the main driver, and then look for other ways to move things that would normally go to the frozen market, to other places. So that's really the wrap up of what's going on in Mississippi currently. As mentioned before, my name's Eric Stafne. I'm at the Coastal Research and Extension Center, and work in Poplarville, Mississippi. If you want to contact me, there's my email, or you can hit me up on Twitter as well. So I hope you enjoyed this presentation and gave you a little bit of insight of what's going on in Mississippi.